March of 1918, an 18-year-old girl walked into a cathedral in Villahermosa, Mexico, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. She wore a simple white dress and a dark shawl draped over her shoulders. Witnesses saw her pray, light a candle, and leave through the heavy wooden doors into the humid morning air. She was never seen alive again. But that's not the disturbing part. The disturbing part is what investigators found years later, sealed inside the walls of her family's home. Her skeleton, entombed in fresh cement while she was still alive. And the man who put her there was her own father. This is the case of Julieta Cruz, a story that Mexican authorities tried to bury for over a century. A story about a secret society that operated in plain sight, about powerful men who believed sacrifice was the price of prosperity, and about a young woman who discovered the truth too late to save herself. The Cruz family was respected in Villahermosa, the capital of Tabasco State in southeastern Mexico. Don Federico Cruz was a successful merchant who'd built a modest empire importing goods from Mexico City and beyond. His wife, Doña Carmela Jimenez, came from one of the oldest families in the region. They lived in a colonial mansion just 2 blocks from Juarez Park in the heart of the city. The house was beautiful, tiled courtyards, flowering trees, hydraulic tiles imported from Merida. From the outside, they looked like the perfect family. They had 3 children. Rodrigo, the eldest at 20, was studying law in Mexico City. Julieta, 18, was known for her intelligence and independent spirit. She played piano, attended Mass religiously, and kept a detailed diary. And there was Manuel, the youngest at 10, quiet and sensitive. But beneath the respectable surface, something dark was growing. Federico Cruz had secrets that would destroy his entire family. On the morning of March 13th, 1918, Julieta left home to attend 7 o'clock Mass at the Cathedral of the Lord of Tabasco, as she did every Wednesday. It was routine, expected, safe. Multiple witnesses saw her enter the church. A flower seller named Rosario Mendez, who always set up her stand in front of the cathedral, later testified that Julieta bought a small bouquet of white lilies around 8:30 that morning. The sky was threatening rain. Julieta thanked her, tucked the flowers under her arm, and walked toward Juarez Park. Then she vanished. And the family didn't report her missing until late afternoon, nearly 9 hours after she'd last been seen. That delay would later seem significant. When Don Federico finally went to the municipal authorities, a search was launched immediately. Villahermosa wasn't a large city in 1918. Only about 15,000 people lived there, concentrated in a relatively small area bordered by the Grijalva River and surrounded by tropical vegetation. Dozens of volunteers combed every corner of the city and its surroundings. They searched the riverbanks, inspected abandoned houses, questioned anyone who might have information. Nothing. Julieta Cruz had simply ceased to exist. The local newspapers ran the story for weeks. Mystery continues over disappearance of young woman from good family, declared La Voz de Tabasco. El Diario de Tabasco went further, suggesting either a romantic escape or a tragic ending. The city was transfixed. Rumors started circulating almost immediately. Some said Julieta had run away with a revolutionary soldier who'd passed through town weeks earlier. Others suggested the independent-minded girl had fled to Mexico City seeking a less restrictive life than provincial Villahermosa offered. Doña Carmela rejected these versions categorically. Visitors found her sitting by the window overlooking the courtyard, staring blankly at the flamboyant tree, repeating the same phrase over and over. My daughter did not leave by choice. Something happened to my Julieta. 2 weeks after the disappearance, a fisherman found a dark shawl floating in the Grijalva River near the Tamulte dock. Doña Carmela identified it as belonging to her daughter. Police intensified their search of the river, dragging it for days, but found nothing else. No body, no evidence. Just that single piece of fabric, waterlogged and muddy. That's when things inside the Cruz house began to change. Neighbors noticed the windows remained shuttered even on the hottest days. They no longer heard the piano music Julieta used to play in the afternoons. The family seemed to have enclosed themselves in a thick, almost tangible silence. Don Federico, once sociable and active in the city's business circles, barely left the house except to attend to his failing store. According to commercial records from that period, his business began experiencing considerable losses starting in April. Young Manuel stopped attending school entirely, and Rodrigo abandoned his law studies in Mexico City and returned home abruptly, never to resume his education. By late April, the official police investigation was suspended. The report, signed by Commander Ernesto Barrientos, concluded with a chilling statement. It is considered probable that Miss Cruz perished by drowning in the Grijalva River, her body carried by the current toward the Gulf of Mexico. Case closed. For most residents of Villahermosa, that was the end of the story. Life went on. Time, as it always does, covered the painful memories with its steady progression. But for some, the mystery of Julieta Cruz lingered like an invisible presence floating over the city. Then the rumors about the Cruz mansion began. Servants started resigning one after another, offering no clear explanations. Some, when they felt safe enough, whispered about strange noises during the night, about doors that closed by themselves, about objects that moved on their own, about crying that seemed to emerge from the walls themselves. Particularly disturbing was what happened in Julieta's room. According to Teresa Hernandez, who worked as the family's cook until June 1918, Doña Carmela kept the room exactly as it had been the day her daughter disappeared. Nobody could enter there except the lady, Teresa declared years later. She spent hours locked in that room talking to herself. The Cruz family's life slowly extinguished like a candle burning down. Federico's business collapsed completely in October. The few who saw him during this time describe a prematurely aged man with an absent gaze and unsteady step. Rodrigo, the eldest son, began frequenting the port's taverns, drinking away what little money remained. He became irritable and withdrawn. Police records show he was detained several times for participating in street brawls. During one arrest, while intoxicated, he shouted something that caught the attention of the officer writing the report. "I know what happened. Everyone in this house knows." Young Manuel stopped speaking almost entirely. His schoolteacher, when interviewed decades later, said, "He was a brilliant, happy child. After the incident, he became like a shadow. His drawings became disturbing, dark. He always drew a house with black figures in the window." But perhaps the most notable change occurred in Doña Carmela. The woman who had always been the family's pillar seemed to disconnect from reality. She began going out alone at night, unthinkable for a woman of her social position in that era. She would wander the streets near the river, calling her daughter's name in a low voice. Neighbors, out of respect or fear, pretended not to see her. The family doctor, Dr. Guillermo Serrano, wrote in his personal diary, discovered decades later, "Visited Mrs. Cruz today. Her mental state concerns me gravely. She insists she hears her daughter walking through the house during the nights. I've prescribed laudanum to help her rest, but I fear her condition worsens. There is something in that house, in that family, that I cannot comprehend. An invisible weight that seems..." Most disturbing was the note found beside his body, written in trembling handwriting. "Forgive me, Julieta. I couldn't protect you." Federico's death accelerated the family's collapse. Without financial resources and with Doña Carmela increasingly disconnected from reality, they had to sell almost all their possessions. The mansion, however, found no buyers. Nobody in Villahermosa wanted to live in a place everyone now considered cursed. Rodrigo, unable to bear the situation, abandoned the city in early 1919. Railway station records show he bought a ticket to Mexico City on February 3rd. He was never heard from again in Villahermosa. Manuel and Doña Carmela remained in the house, occupying only a couple of rooms. Neighbors rarely saw them. Occasionally, the boy would emerge to buy basics at the corner store. Those who served him described a silent child with an old man's eyes and a young face. Then in September 1919, 18 months after Julieta's disappearance, came the incident that would put the case back on everyone's lips. In the early morning hours of September 22nd, a fire broke out in the Cruz mansion. By the time firefighters arrived, much of the structure had been consumed by flames. Among the debris, they found two bodies, Doña Carmela and Manuel. Both died from asphyxiation, according to the medical examiner. What was strange about the case, according to the firefighters' report, was that the bodies weren't found in their bedrooms, but in the house's basement, a space the family apparently didn't use. The basement itself was a surprising discovery. None of the neighbors or family acquaintances remembered its existence. It was a small, windowless space, accessed through a trapdoor hidden under a rug in Don Federico's study. What they found there, besides the bodies, left investigators perplexed. The walls were covered with writing, apparently made with charcoal. Disconnected fragments, names, dates. Julieta's name appeared over and over again. In the center of the room was a chair, and facing it on the wall, a broken mirror. Commissioner Ramon Mendoza, in charge of the investigation, wrote in his report, "The scene suggests some type of obsessive ritual related to the missing young woman. The writings on the walls appear to be the work of Mrs. Cruz, judging by the handwriting. Young Manuel was probably taken there by his mother the night of the fire." The case might have ended there, filed away as a tragic family story marked by a daughter's disappearance and the mother's subsequent mental deterioration. However, something found among the debris added a new and disturbing chapter. During cleanup operations, a worker discovered a metal box protected from the fire by having been buried under the basement floor. Inside was a diary, presumably written by Julieta Cruz in the months before her disappearance. The diary was turned over to authorities and subsequently filed with the rest of the case documentation. Its contents were not made public at the time. In fact, its existence is barely mentioned in official records, as if there had been interest in keeping it secret. It wasn't until 1964, almost half a century later, when local historian Eduardo Zapata found references to the diary while researching his book, Chronicles of Tabasco, Mysteries and Legends. He requested access to the police archive, but was informed the document had been lost during a reorganization in the 1940s. Zapata, however, was a tenacious researcher. Through personal contacts, he managed to interview Joaquin Hernandez, son of Teresa, the Cruz family's former cook. Joaquin, already an elderly man, remembered that his mother had kept copies of some pages from the diary. Teresa had found the diary weeks before the fire while cleaning Julieta's room and had copied fragments because she considered their content disturbing. The copies, written in a school notebook with Teresa's trembling handwriting, offer a haunting glimpse into Julieta Cruz's final months. The fragments are dated between December 1917 and March 1918, just before her disappearance. The first fragment, dated December 20th, reads, "Father has been acting strange since he returned from his trip to Veracruz. He spends hours locked in his study. When I ask what worries him, he looks at me as if he doesn't recognize me. Last night I heard him talking with Mother. They mentioned something about the society and the need to protect our place. I don't understand what they're referring to. Days later, December 26th, Julieta wrote, Rodrigo has returned from the capital unexpectedly. He says his studies aren't going well, but I suspect there's something more. He and Father argued behind closed doors. Afterward, Rodrigo spent all night drinking in his room. When I went to see him, he told me to stay away from Father. Don't trust him, he said. Not after what he's done. On January 7th, the young woman noted, something is happening in this house. Nobody talks about it, but I can feel it. Mother barely eats. Manuel has nightmares every night. Rodrigo spends his days away and returns drunk. And Father looks at me in a way that makes me uncomfortable, as if he's calculating something. The most disturbing fragment is dated February 28th, barely 2 weeks before the disappearance. Today I found the key to Father's study. I shouldn't have entered, but I needed to know what he's hiding. I found a ledger different from the one he uses for the store. There are names, dates, and amounts. I recognized some of the names. They're important families from Villahermosa. Next to the ledger were letters with a strange symbol on the seal, an eye inside a triangle. One of the letters mentioned an initiation and a necessary sacrifice. I'm scared. What is Father involved in? The final entry, March the 10th, 3 days before the disappearance, is particularly chilling. Last night I heard noises in the basement. I didn't know we had a basement, but I followed the sound to Father's study. Under the rug I found a trap door. I didn't dare go down, but I could hear voices. Father was there with other people. They were talking about me. The girl is perfect, said a voice I didn't recognize. Pure and innocent. Father responded with something I couldn't understand. Then there was silence, followed by laughter. Tomorrow I'll go speak with Father Montero after Mass. He'll know what to do. If something happens to me, I want it known that it was my father, Federico Cruz. Him and that group he belongs to, the Guardians of the Eye. The diary ends abruptly there. Historian Zapata, fascinated and disturbed by these fragments, attempted to investigate more about the Guardians of the Eye, the mysterious society Julieta mentioned. His inquiries led him to discover that between 1915 and 1920, a secret group formed by businessmen and local politicians did indeed exist in Villahermosa. They met under the guise of a social club, but rumors from that era suggested darker activities. In the ecclesiastical archives of the Cathedral of the Lord of Tabasco, Zapata found references to a report presented by Father Anselmo Montero to the bishop in April 1918. In it, the priest expressed concern about pagan practices and blasphemous rituals that, according to his sources, were taking place in the city. The report specifically mentions Federico Cruz as a possible member of this group. It also references a young woman who had approached Father Montero seeking help, though it doesn't identify her by name. Curiously, Father Montero was transferred to a rural parish in Chiapas barely a week after presenting this report. According to ecclesiastical records, the official reason was delicate health. He never returned to Villahermosa. But the most revealing discovery came in 1962, during heavy rains that caused the Grijalva River to overflow. The waters washed away part of the debris, exposing the house's foundations and, to everyone's surprise, the nearly intact structure of the basement. Concerned authorities decided to finally demolish what remained and fill in the land. During demolition work, workers found something macabre embedded in one of the basement walls, a skeleton. The remains, according to subsequent forensic analysis, belonged to a young woman between 17 and 20 years old. Death had occurred by asphyxiation, and the body had been placed in the wall while the cement was still fresh. Next to the remains was found a silver medallion with the image of Saint Cecilia, patron saint of musicians. According to the oldest neighbors, Julieta Cruz always wore a similar medallion, a gift from her mother for her 15th birthday. The case briefly returned to newspaper headlines. Macabre discovery confirms tragic end of Julieta Cruz, headlined El Heraldo de Tabasco. However, barely a week later, the news disappeared from the media. According to rumors, there had been pressure from high places to silence the case. The skeleton was handed over to the only living relative who could be located, a distant cousin of Doña Carmela living in Mérida. The remains were buried in a private ceremony attended by only a handful of people, mostly elderly folks who had known the Cruz family in better times. The land where the mansion once stood was finally converted into a small parking lot. Nothing indicates today that one of Villahermosa's darkest stories occurred there. Nothing except perhaps that uncomfortable sensation some drivers report feeling when they park there after nightfall, that impression of not being alone, of being watched by invisible eyes. In 1968, during renovation of the old building that housed Villahermosa's City Hall, workers found a safe hidden behind a false wall in what had been the municipal president's office. Inside were various documents, including a complete police report on Julieta Cruz's disappearance, signed by Commissioner Ramon Mendoza. The report, dated April 1918, was never officially filed. In fact, it contradicts the official version in several points. According to this report, Julieta's disappearance wasn't reported by her father immediately. Don Federico waited until late afternoon, nearly 5 in the evening, to approach authorities. By then, almost 9 hours had passed since the young woman was last seen. Even more revealing is Father Anselmo Montero's testimony, collected on March 15th, 2 days after the disappearance. The priest stated that Julieta had come to him the previous week, expressing fear about activities her father was involved in. The young woman spoke of secret meetings in her house's basement, of strange rituals, and of a group called the Guardians of the Eye. Father Montero, alarmed, advised Julieta to return with concrete evidence so he could present the case to the bishop. The young woman promised to return on March 13th after Mass. She never did. Commissioner Mendoza, according to his report, attempted to investigate these accusations. He visited the Cruz house on March 16th, requesting to inspect Don Federico's study and other spaces. He found no evidence of a basement or the activities described by Julieta. Don Federico was cooperative but visibly nervous during the inspection. Mendoza also attempted to investigate the Guardians of the Eye. His inquiries led him to discover that several prominent men from Villahermosa met regularly in the back room of a business owned by Ernesto Valladares, the municipal president's brother-in-law. These meetings were conducted under the appearance of card games, but lasted until the early morning hours and were surrounded by great secrecy. On March 25th, Mendoza received a visit from the municipal president in his office. According to his notes, he was urged to stop digging into matters that don't concern the police and to concentrate on finding the girl, not defaming respectable citizens. 2 days later, Mendoza was temporarily relieved of his duties, supposedly due to health problems. The case then passed to Commander Ernesto Barrientos, who quickly concluded that Julieta Cruz had probably drowned in the river. Mendoza, however, continued investigating on his own. In his report, dated April 30th, he details his finding. I have reason to believe that Miss Cruz was the victim of premeditated murder, possibly related to the secret activities of her father and other prominent members of local society. Evidence suggests the young woman discovered something she shouldn't have known and represented a threat to this group. Her elimination was decided to protect the Guardians of the Eye's secrets. The report concludes with a handwritten note from Mendoza. I present these conclusions, knowing justice will probably never be served. The people involved have too much power in the city. For my safety and my family's, I've decided to accept a position in Merida. I leave this report hidden with the hope that someday the truth will come to light. May God have mercy on Julieta Cruz's soul. In 1971, when the old building that had housed Federico Cruz's store was demolished to build a modern shopping center, workers found something disturbing in the foundations, a small sealed chamber of approximately 2 square meters, hidden under the backroom floor. Inside were various objects, occult books in several languages, an improvised altar with strange symbols carved in wood, and most disturbing, jars with what appeared to be human remains preserved in formaldehyde. They also found a diary, presumably written by Federico Cruz himself, that shed new light on the case. Though partially damaged by humidity, the diary contained entries spanning from 1910 to shortly before Federico's death in 1918. The early pages described his initiation to the Brotherhood, presented as an opportunity to ascend socially and ensure his business success. Over time, however, the tone changes. Cruz describes increasingly dark rituals, meetings where power, greed, and practices he himself qualifies as blasphemous but necessary to maintain his position were mixed. An entry from September 1917 is particularly revealing. R has discovered part of the truth. He threatens to expose us if I don't abandon the Brotherhood. He doesn't understand it's too late, that there's no way out. The eye always watches. I've asked him to return to his studies in the capital, but he refuses. I fear his obstinacy will put us all in danger. The entries from February and March 1918 are especially harrowing. Federico writes about the need for significant sacrifice for the spring equinox ritual. The Brotherhood, he explains, was going through a critical moment. Some members had been exposed in other cities, and there were fears the Villahermosa group would suffer the same fate. The Grand Vigilant has made it clear we need a powerful sacrifice, Cruz wrote on February 20th. Something that demonstrates our total loyalty to the Brotherhood. Only then can we ensure our protection and prosperity. I have meditated much on this. The sacrifice must be something truly valuable to me. Only then will it have the necessary power. The entry from March 10th, 3 days before Julieta's disappearance, is the most disturbing. Jay has been snooping. Today I found her in my study reviewing my documents. I fear she's discovered the entrance to the basement. When I confronted her, she denied everything, but I saw fear in her eyes. Later, I heard her talking with Carmela, mentioning Father Montero. This complicates things. But perhaps it also offers a solution. The Grand Vigilant has approved my proposal. The sacrifice will be accepted. May the Eye forgive me. The final entry, dated March 12th, is brief and disturbing. Everything is prepared for tomorrow. J will attend Mass, as always. R has been sent to the border on business, and Carmela will take M to the doctor in San Juan Bautista. The house will be empty. The executor brother will intercept her on her return from the cathedral. The ritual will take place at noon, when the sun is at its zenith. May her sacrifice strengthen us all. There are no more entries after this. Presumably, the events of March 13th unfolded as planned. Julieta Cruz was intercepted after Mass, taken to the basement of her own home, and sacrificed in a ritual whose exact nature we can only imagine with horror. Federico's diary ends abruptly, but the final pages contain disconnected fragments, suggesting rapid mental deterioration after his daughter's death. I hear her walking through the house during the nights, he writes in what appears to be an April entry. Her footsteps on the wooden floor. Sometimes she stops in front of my door. I know she's waiting. And later, Carmela knows the truth. I see it in her eyes. She doesn't accuse me, doesn't shout at me, but her silence is worse than any reproach. R also suspects. He looks at me with hatred. Only M seems unaware. But even he has begun to draw things he shouldn't know. The last legible page contains only one sentence, written in trembling handwriting. The eye watches me from the shadows. It no longer protects me. Now it judges me. Today, more than a century after Julieta Cruz walked into that cathedral carrying white lilies, the case remains officially unsolved. The land where the Cruz mansion stood is now occupied by shops and offices. Tourists and locals walk past every day, completely unaware of the horror that occurred beneath their feet. But some say if you're there on March 13th, just before dawn, you might see a young woman in a white dress walking near the river, carrying flowers, forever searching for the safety of her home. A home that betrayed her in the most unthinkable way. The guardians of the eye. Some believe they never truly disappeared. They simply became more discreet, adapting to new times, their members still meeting in secret, maintaining dark traditions that date back to the early 20th century. And if you ask the oldest residents of Villahermosa, they'll tell you, some secrets in this city are protected by very powerful people. And some of those secrets have to do with what they did to Julieta Cruz.